Welcome to Making Sense of the Madness. Great show lined up. Jerome Corsi, Brandon Weikart. You're not going to want to miss it. Buckle up and get ready to make sense of the madness. And we are now joined by author, investigative journalist, and much more, Jerome Corsi. Thank you so much for being with us, sir. We're in the home stretch of this election cycle. And, I got to tell you, as much as some of the political moves that Trump has made, J.D. Vance, for instance, don't get me wrong, he handles himself well in the media. Certainly wouldn't have been my pick for vice president, but very savvy in the fact that, I saw months ago him on this podcast circuit. I was pretty assured that he would end this with Rogan, which he did, which was a media sensation and continues to be, and even had a rally at in New York City, in Madison Square Garden, where it is now impossible to deny that this media portrayal of Trump, especially even on the coastlines of New York and California, is nothing but a farce. So what are your thoughts on where we are right now in this campaign?
Well, I think you've summed up very well where we are. I mean, at God's Five Stones, which is our 501c3, godsfivestones.com, you're showing it on the screen, G-O-D, no apostrophe on the S. You spell out five, F-I-V-E. Stones is plural, godsfivestones.com. We're doing a lot of showing that there are algorithms. There are these cryptographic schemes that have been secretly embedded in the State Board of Election databases, the voter registration databases, the databases used for the election. And these algorithms allow for false votes to be created, as it were, fictitious voters, and then they can be then pulled. It's kind of like a card marking scheme. These marked cards, the fake votes, can be dealt back into the voter lists, voter rolls, so that they can't be found except by the criminals, and they can be voted when the criminals want them voted. And so we're really exposing it. In fact, I just wrote yesterday an article that will be in American Thinker on Thursday. And what it demonstrates is that we have in Georgia, we have real election data that shows, for instance, 3,000 people casting absentee ballots or voting early, but none of the 3,000 are on the state voter registration list. Well, it's impossible to vote if you're not on the state registration list. You're not a voter. So what they've done is they've taken these clone votes, and there are literally thousands of clone votes. Clone votes are duplicates. The second record is created for you with a new voter ID. And they seem to be making clones from people who have died, people who have moved, people who are inactive in voting. They've even put felons on the voter registration list in Georgia. We have this from research that's been done by a group called The Georgia Nerds, the GA Nerds _ real. They have a channel on Rumble. And the one that really shocked me was they took the record of a voter who moved to South Carolina. They created a clone. They took the original South Carolina off of the voter registration database. They voted the clone. Then they put the original record back in the database, took the clone off, and they voted the original file from the person in South Carolina. And we can document this. We can show it to you in the Georgia voter registration and voting lists. So there's documented cases now of the algorithms being used to commit actual voting fraud in Georgia. I can tie it to votes that were fraudulently cast. It means we have actionable crimes here being committed.
Now, let's talk about that a little, because I guess one of my largest criticisms of Trump when he re-announced that he was running this time is that, to me, he clearly won in 2020. He was the executive, and yet there was no real way to audit the election. All of these mechanisms had been put into place, and really none of them have been repealed. Now, you don't have the cover of the COVID 1984 nightmare and the hysteria that it caused this time around. But as you said, there are so many of these practices. One of the things that I found, I wouldn't say it's taboo to talk about, but it's certainly not something that the alternative or conservative media likes to talk about, is these machines have been corrupt for over 2 decades. And, we've proved that they, in fact, can be hacked, have been hacked. There's internal software that's proprietary, that's unauditable. We've moved from smearing people that pointed this out to putting people in prison that, have auditor under their name. Tina Peters just got 9 years. So now we're here, right? And you're pointing out yet another hole in the system. In many cases, a lot of 2020 is still being litigated. And the talking point, the Bernaysian angle that the media likes to play is there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud or widespread election interference. It's always widespread, which you could never define, right? So in that sense, I also get the Trump mantra, too big to rig, which maybe we're there, maybe we're not. I don't know. That's what I want to get your opinion on right now.
Well, I think we are at too big to rig, and I think one of the solutions to the fraud is just to have such a massive turnout for Trump that it's impossible for them to steal enough votes without being obvious. But the mistake we made in 2020 was we let these elections be certified, and challenging a certified election in court is very, very difficult to do. And, I've tried to warn people like Sidney Powell not to say she had the Kraken because, again, it wasn't clear she could prove voter fraud. And it was the same with, saying the machines were changing votes. There are reasons why machines legitimately change votes. Not all the things we see were legitimate, but I'm saying it's much more difficult to challenge them, and you run the risk of committing a crime yourself and making an assertion you can't prove. What I'm saying is we're not alleging that any election was fraudulent. I'm saying that, number one, we can show you mathematically that these algorithms are present. They're there. And you can't deny that these algorithms are in the state database. And we can show you they're being used to commit voter fraud. And now in Georgia, we can tie that to specific cases. We've got records which demonstrate how the algorithms are used. And so therefore, we're a different place. And a decision also came out which is very favorable to us, which was the ones who want fair elections. This was a decision in the U.S. District Court. The case was American Encore versus Adrian Fontes. He's the Secretary of State who oversees elections in Arizona. And by the way, we found the algorithm in Arizona as well. Fontes in 2020, Cochise County would not certify the 2020 midterm election. They wanted to do a hand count of the ballots, and they didn't trust that. They thought the machines were switching votes, and Fontes forbid them from doing it. So they would not certify Cochise County in 2022. Well, Fontes had written some rules where he could canvass the rest of the counties and he could certify the election without Cochise County. The case went to the U.S. District Court for the District of Arizona, and Judge Michael Liberty on September 27th this year issued a decision saying that what Fontes did was unconstitutional because it disenfranchised the voters for Cochise County. Their votes didn't count. Okay, and he said that's against the law. It's unconstitutional, violates the 14th Amendment franchise rights. Well, this means that any supervisor right now who wants to question an election, the certifiers have to certify the election in all the states. Now they're aware of the patterns of cheating, and they can demand, for instance, a forensic examination of the mail-in ballots. Says we're not going to certify this election until we check the registrations on cards to see if the signatures on the mail-in ballot match the signature on the registration card. See if the person who signed the ballot on the outside is the person who voted. We're going to send some people out in the community to see if any of these people really exist at these addresses and if they have the right to vote, the legal right to vote. So now there's steps that can be taken, and the supervisors can intervene. And Attorney Cleta Mitchell has been organizing the supervisors in this election integrity project. In fact, the New York Times today even wrote a story today, fearful of saying, well, of course, Donald Trump, they want to say committed insurrection. And, so now these secretaries of state, which are going to uphold election laws and try to wave a red flag if they see cheating or evidence of cheating, well, that they don't like that in the New York Times. It's going to kill their ability to steal so many votes. So I think we're in a fundamental different situation. And since I'm just saying these algorithms have been there. Some of these states, these algorithms have been in the database since 2007. I'm asking, why are they there? Who put them there? Is this an intelligence operation? How many people are in the House of Representatives or the Senate because they were voted there by the algorithms, not by the people?
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because you also mentioned early voting. And
yes,
you talked about the fact that you believe we already have 3,000 totally fraudulent clone votes. And you would imagine they're totally fraudulent clone votes. They're for Kamala Harris. Let's just assume that. Now, right. Everybody's been talking about record turnout on this early voting. It's been a big push for the last 18 to 24 months, again, with people, within that conservative circuit, Kash Patel, et cetera, et cetera. I've heard it again and again and again. Now the talking point is there's been record turnout, and it looks good for Donnie T. Again, I'm not convinced one way or the other, and they're already telling you, and by they, I mean the mainstream media is already telling you we're not getting results on election night. What is your thoughts right now on where we actually stand with early voting? And then let's say we get Donald Trump in there. He's kind of promised to reform it to one-day voting, voter ID, paper ballot. How realistic is that to come into play during his presidency? Again, should he get in? And is it even a possibility that could get put through before the midterm elections?
Well, the early voting is turning out to be surprisingly favorable to Donald Trump. And people are already coming out in huge numbers and voting for Trump. And that's, I think, surprised the left. Secondly, I think that it is going to be an overwhelming presence of voting on election day for Trump. Kamala Harris is one of the worst candidates I've ever seen in my life, and Wool's even more difficult, filled with problems. Kamala, in her interview with Brett Baer, did such a disastrous job. It was as tragic to her prospects as the debate that Joe Biden did with Donald Trump. I think people who are voting for Kamala are voting for an agenda that the average American does not want to endorse. There's nothing positive. The agenda that the Democrats are advancing right now seems to be perpetual war, the middle class being squeezed by inflation. I mean, if Kamala Harris had 3 years in the White House, why didn't she do something about her then? She talks about turning a page. She could have done that going back to 2021. So the point is, they're in a very weak position. And I think the Democrats are close to thinking that they can't salvage Kamala Harris. So they may go to try to use the algorithms and cheat for the House and Senate races that are close. Also, the fact that these algorithms are now in public attention and much work has been done since 2020, the signs of voter cheating are going to be more apparent. It's going to be more difficult to pull it off. And secondly, with the data, with what I found in Georgia, which is actual voter fraud, it's going to be harder for the election officials to avoid criminal charges. And if we can demonstrate that they're wanting actually to destroy election integrity. Their goal is to make a voting cheating easy. That's possibly treasonous.
The problem with that, though, and just in a reality viewpoint, we have not had any accountability on an executive level in decades. I'm not saying you're wrong, but we got to take a break. When we come back, I want to hone in on how you feel they may go after the more localized big elections in Congress and in the Senate and the importance there as well.
Hey folks, it's your buddy John Rich here and co-founder of Old Glory Bank. Let me ask you a question. Why would you trust your banking with people that hate you? Well, you shouldn't. We're building a freedom economy, and now we have a pro-America bank. It's called Old Glory Bank. Check it out at oldglorybank.com and open yourself an account today.
Old Glory Bank is a full-service, FDIC-insured online bank with business and consumer banking and customers in all 50 states. It takes just 8 minutes to open an account at oldglorybank.com.
I couldn't give anything a higher endorsement.
I would be remiss had I not include Cardio Miracle on my very short list of secrets.
It's the real deal. It's a real product. It's not another supplement.
I'm operating about 6 to 8 hours, and I've noticed that being on this Cardio Miracle has made a huge difference.
Since I started taking Cardio Miracle, about 8 months into it, the benefits have been fantastic.
If I get hungry, then I just have a Cardio Miracle.
Not only is it safe, but it's necessary to take Cardio Miracle to stay well.
This let me sleep. It's showing up more energy, more get up and go. And it's all because of what this company does.
For me as a doctor, Cardio Miracle is a staple.
Cardio Miracle to me is hope in a glass.
To try Cardio Miracle for yourself and get a special fan discount, go to the host page right now and click the link for Cardio Miracle.
And we are back with Jerome Corsi. Now, you mentioned how they may go in and just try to alter the congressional and Senate elections. And I think that's been happening on some level, again, for decades. In fact, you kind of alluded to that on asking how many people the Central Intelligence Agency really put in these positions. I think you're correct there as well. I don't think there's a lot of people out there that don't think that they can be too big to rig, but there's also a lot of people that are going to be down-ballot Republicans this time around. I just went back home to my place in New York, upstate New York, totally ruined it. More homeless people than I've ever seen, people ODing all over the place. I mean, this is a college town. The hospital's bread and butter is the transgender surgeries. Yes, they're doing them to children as well. I mean, it's been inverted. There's not a lot of college kids. There's construction going on. They said they were going to build homes for artisans. It's Section 8 housing. I mean, they've got Narcan machines. It's gotten so bad, they're not just teaching the high school teachers how to administer Narcan. Now the middle school and high school students know how to administer Narcan. So thank you. And I never make it about left and right, but you should have heard my friends that have never been political and certainly not conservative. This Democratic mayor and this agenda is over the top. I'm voting down ballot Republican. So, what are your thoughts on that? Because a lot of people are going to do that, and I think that's going to make it a little more difficult. But at the same time, even here in Iowa where I live, they've changed the exit polling process. Used to be a piece of paper. Now they have digital signatures, Jerome. I don't know if you've seen that, but they did that this year, and I'm sure if they did it in Iowa, they did it in a bunch of other places. So now I'm very fearful it will also be very much a thing where they can alter the exit polls.
Well, I mean, first of all, you raise the issue that we've been losing in the courts, where I think the cases have been framed in a way that makes them likely to lose because they're trying to overturn a certified election. That's very difficult to do. I think the American people are getting sick and tired of living in these conditions. If we're facing with the Democrats in power, nuclear war, we're facing the collapse of the dollar, collapse of the middle class, if people can't put food on the table for their children, if they can't walk safely in a city that's overwhelmed with drug addicts, homelessness, as you point out, the businesses leave the cities start to go bankrupt. Even the mayor of New York is starting to object to the number of immigrants that are being dumped in New York City and put in hotels and paid for by the federal government. People have had it. At some point or other, you can tolerate it, and people would prefer to tolerate it. But then when you see where the LGBT agenda is going, what its real aim is, which is to destroy America, and I've been writing about this for decades, at some point or other, people have had enough of it. Even the Roman Empire went to Christianity at some point, which was hard to imagine it would ever happen. But finally, I think the women got tired of their children being made into sexual perverts, bisexual perverts. They didn't born these children in order to have them turn into the monsters sexually that the left has in mind. And again, the Satanism, which this is, it's evil. It's anti-human being. They don't believe human beings have souls. They don't believe we have dignity. They think it's all a construct, a word game. They just read Noah Harari and authors like him, and they don't believe in any fixed or eternal values. Everything is subjective.
Well, they're social Darwinists. And then on top of that, I just got done speaking at the Reawaken America tour for, I think, the 9th time. And I focused on the from the transgender to transhuman agenda.
Right.
Because, again, these people, they want you to reject your inherent biology. They want to tell you there are literally billions of these genders. Now, I want people to really think about that. No offense, everybody. I like to think I'm a pretty sharp guy. I can't remember billions of things, let alone billions of genders. In fact, you can't either. And that's why we have genetic imprints of instinctual behavior through our humanity and generations that they don't want to acknowledge. And in fact, when you look at this, you have like the Hararis, et cetera, out there that are basically advocating that there's going to be this group of people that are going to biologically live forever. Meanwhile, they're telling all of us that we can transfer our consciousness and digitally live forever. And that's and while we euthanize ourselves, by the way, that's the big sell. But they're also very, very honest about even a post-human future, which is extremely insane to me that you would want to reject all the greatness that we've built. And look, Jerome, I've been doing this a long time. I thought after 9/11, maybe we were going to get some justice. I thought, hey, we could get our constitutional republic back. Little hope with Trump being in there. Certainly not perfect. Best president of my lifetime. At this point, I'm just telling people to stay human. Even the mRNA hate and lie shots, that was just another way to alter our humanity and just take a little bit more away from us as a species, in my opinion. So when you're dealing with that, right? I mean, these elections to me are really important because I'm talking on a macro level. And I actually had this discussion last night with friends. On a micro level, if you can't challenge elections anymore, what about your county? What about your sheriff? What about your state senators? Because all those matter too. And people aren't talking about them as much. We're talking about congressional and Senate, but there are layers beneath. And one of the things that I like to say is, you got to think globally, you got to act locally. You got to be in your community and make sure those around you at least are part of your political and social values.
Well, what you're saying is exactly right. I mean, I just think at some point or other in human experience, this insanity, these delusions, which become like mass psychosis, this formation of whether it's the tulip craze in the 1500s or whatever year it was. I mean, people are subject to wild, hysterical ideas. Let's all march off in the Crusades to, rescue the Holy Land, leave our families, and walk across Europe to the Israel to go take back Jerusalem. I mean, these are insanity ideas that can capture human brain activity in a mass psychosis way. It's almost like mass hypnosis. But eventually it ends. Eventually people realize that this is just stupid, that the ideas just don't work. And then the left's ideas don't work. None of these ideas work. You're not going to procreate a race where you mutilated the sex organs of children. You are not going to have a productive society if you can't use hydrocarbon fuels. You can't charge your electric battery in the winter. If it runs out of battery, juice while you're in the car. You can't get out of the car. You can't open the doors. Battery catches on fire, burns down your house. I mean, these are just bad ideas. And the left's ideas are all bad ideas because they're all engineered to cheat, steal, lie, all the things the Ten Commandments tell us not to do. And following Satan is following the prince of lies. And eventually, the people who do follow Satan become exposed. You've got now P. Diddy, who is out there, with all his sex tapes. And it's only a matter of time until we get some sex tapes of some real celebrities that hit hard. And the satanic nature of this. We just published a Post Hill Press, a book called Silicon Satan, written by a guy who was in the Satanism of Silicon Valley and escaped from it, Craig Lund. We're working with him to get this book written for about 6 years. It's a horrifying book in terms of what the practices are, including rituals where babies are killed and eaten. I mean, the things that go on in Satanism in Silicon Valley and Hollywood and in these communities are just horrific, but they're happening. And so we published the book not to glorify it, but to let people know the true horror. And he's created a website called siliconsatan.com in which he's exposing, that the P. Diddy story is really evidently P. Diddy decided he wanted out. And so they destroyed him by releasing all these tapes. And now everybody that he blackmailed by participating in these events and filming, they're all at risk. Same thing happened to Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, these things collapse of their own weight. I mean, I've always been convinced that under Constantine, the ancient Roman Empire abandoned the pagan religion because the women were sick and tired of having their children made into these, homo whatever they were in that era, because the sexual perversions that we're doing today remind me of the sexual perversions that were at their height just before Rome abandoned paganism. And here comes Jesus Christ along. He's talking about perpetual human values. He's talking about there being experience afterlife. He's talking about this not being utopia. He's talking about us being a fallen people. Well, the biblical message eventually returns and takes hold. I just hope we don't have to have World War III before it happens.
Well, I also hope that we don't go to World War III. We're going to talk about that after this break.
My name is General Mike Flynn, and I want everyone to know that I stand fully behind Beverly Hills Precious Metals and its owner, Andrew Sorcini. We are facing one of the greatest periods of financial uncertainty in both American and world history, and so now is the time to organize your finances. With the advent of the BRICS pay system, we need to now seriously consider how we can take better care of ourselves and our families and start some serious decision making when it comes to our wealth. You can also ask about their newest 2-ounce coin of yours truly. It's an absolutely great gift, and I am deeply honored to be part of history, as well as helping people protect their finances, their wealth, and their investments. So visit gold.generalflynn.com. Tell them the General sent you. Thank you so very much. God bless you, and God bless America.
The Donor Deck represents a groundbreaking independent crowdfunding initiative driven by patriots like you to bring back our esteemed President Donald J. Trump to office. With unwavering passion, we pledge all profits from the sale to MAGA Inc. and Fight Like a Flynn PAC. The exquisitely detailed challenge coin is a timeless collectible to be passed down to generations. It symbolizes your continuous dedication to assisting President Trump in his quest to rejuvenate America to its former greatness. Get your Donor Deck now. Go to thepatriot.tv store and click on Donor Deck. Enjoy the magnificent artwork and scripture on each playing card, knowing our appreciation for your continuous dedication to assisting President Trump in his quest to rejuvenate America to its former greatness. You'll get this keepsake collectible challenge coin acknowledging your support for Donald Trump's run back to the White House, and the Donor Deck of 52 exquisite playing cards, plus a beautiful display case to show your challenge coin. Go to thepatriot.tv store and get your Donor Deck now.
And we are back with Jerome Corsi. Now, when we're talking about what's gone on in Ukraine, first of all, we've set the scene there again for decades. Obviously ramped it up a decade ago, 2014, where you had the out-and-out coup and obvious Central Intelligence Agency involvement. But what we've seen there in the last, several years, ever since this conflict kicked off, is insanity, and on both sides. When I watch a bus full of kids that look like they're 15, 16 years old, not just boys, girls, going to the front lines of the meat grinder, I kind of remember that. I mean, how many of those kids are surviving? Flip side, in the Middle East, we're now a year past October 7th, which was highly questionable to me in the first place. Obviously, the United States has been involved from the get-go. There were U.S. Special Forces on the ground that day. They sent more. We've sent weapon systems. We also know about the aid that has been sent. Delta Force there involved. It's expanded into Lebanon. Iran is now involved. All dangerous stuff. All stuff, I don't like. I don't like seeing dead babies in my feed. I see about 24 of them a week just by scrolling. No, thank you. I hope that Trump can get in there and, do what he says. I want to get your take on that, because at one end he has said he's going to stop the Ukraine-Russia stuff with a conversation even before he gets in. And with the Middle East, at least my hope is he makes Netanyahu go with a strict plan, because I think there's just only bad solutions there. And hopefully after that is done, there's some kind of stabilization and we're not just in out-and-out war in that region.
Well, I think you would take any of these situations, the Middle East, I think the Democrats, John Kerry, for instance, sending airplanes full of cash to Iran, and then allowing an agreement to be made where Iran can eventually build nuclear weapons. Policies maintained and carried on by Biden, allowing Iran to get back into the oil business. President Trump had Iran just about out of cash. And the Middle East was going into the Abraham agreements, where countries were deciding, if we decide to coexist with Israel, we can make the Middle East bloom. We can all have economic growth. We don't have to have wars. If you foster war, you're going to get war. And if the Democrats, I believe in Ukraine, I think they want to keep the money laundering center open for the CIA. And so therefore they want to perpetuate the war. And they've had this insane idea. I guess the Democrats have hated Russia since the fall of the Berlin Wall, when Russia decided that it was going to renounce communism. That was anathema to the Democrats. So they turned against Russia and want to go to war with Russia. The Democratic Party has become a communist party. And I think it's now on the verge of becoming a treasonous party in the open, wanting to destroy elections. That's now destroying one of the bedrocks of our freedoms. When you come in and you have a fundamentally different approach, as Donald Trump does, and say, look, the countries are going to work together. But the CIA, let's face it about the CIA. 2011, I caught HSBC money laundering for the Mexican drug cartels, and they were fined $1 billion. TD Bank just got fined $3 billion for money laundering. You can't run, the CIA is running the drug cartels, let's face it. Intelligence agencies run the drug cartels. You don't have these drug lords running around and all these transfers of cash and fake money laundering without it being recognized by the Department of Treasury, the NSA, and the CIA. CIA is also running pedophilia. CIA is cashing in on these businesses. If the CIA needs to have all this money for its black ops, we don't have any control over its black ops. If they killed Jack Kennedy, in my book earlier this year in March, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the final analysis showed through forensic analysis of the x-rays that Jack Kennedy was shot obviously twice from the front. CIA has been lying about that for 60 years.
And by the way, Trump got asked about that by Joe Rogan on the podcast. He probably gave his most extensive answer ever. However, he still ingratiated Michael Pompeo, who he let speak at the RNC. So again, at this point, I always look at, first of all, I tell people, look in the mirror, be your own hero. But at the end of the day, I suck as bad as everybody else. So there are no heroes. There are only villains of varying degrees. I'm trying to do my best out here, Mr. Corsi. But seriously,
there are people who are truly traditionally good, traditionally raised families, and there are actually millions of them. They, Richard Nixon used to call the silent majority. They're not going to get up in the streets in revolution. I do think they'll get out and vote for Donald Trump. They come to rallies in mass numbers. Kamala Harris can't get 10 people to come to an event if she paid them. And it's obvious that she has no support whatsoever. So her support is going to be fabricated. Eventually, the lies collapse. Lies have great sway. It's easier to persuade people with lies. You mentioned Edward Bernays earlier. Well, I knew Edward Bernays, and he had outlined and showed the mass psychology that allows lies to be told. Hitler proved it with his great lies, and Goebbels, both of whom wanted Edward Bernays to come to Nazi Germany and help them when he wrote in 1933 a book called Propaganda. Of course, he was a Jew and refused, but they used the book. And I know Bernays was not intending it to be used for evil purposes, but what he discovered and expounded upon was how the CIA creates these narratives and lies. And, I'm at the point where I think the best advice that could be given to Donald Trump, if somebody is speaking to you in Washington, D.C., your first assumption ought to be they're lying. And your second assumption should be, why are they lying? What do they want? And that's how you've got to approach Washington. I think you've got to take a look at the United Nations and assume it's anti-American, wants to destroy America. And you've got to take a look at many of our own politicians who have either been compromised by the sex and drug parties they still run in Washington, D.C. for the elite and film everybody.
Which, by the way, was exposed by that freshman congressman that didn't get a second term just this last cycle. Jerome, unfortunately, we have run out of time. We could talk about the United Nations for an entire hour, I'm sure. God5stones.com, that's spell it all the way out. God5stones.com is where you find everything Mr. Corsi these days. Thank you so much, sir.
Hi, fellow patriots. How are you today? No, really, how are you? If you're looking for a way to energize, depuff, revitalize your skin, and maybe soothe some sore muscles, look no further than the Patriot TV store and the Nu Skin Renew Spa IO system. This is not your basic body massaging system. Nuh-uh. This has adaptive microcurrent technology that goes through these wonderful nodes on the bottom to really get in there. When you use it, you feel it just gently tickling in there and massaging everything. It's marvelous. And not only do you get the device, you also get a free tube of the special conductive gel to go with it. So there you are. You can depuff, you can revitalize, energize, and not only that, contour, firm, and tone. And we all want that. So go to the Patriot TV store now and get yours today from Nu Skin, the Renew Spa IO system. Attention business owners, are you ready to advertise to millions of loyal patriots ready to buy your products or services? Here is your golden chance to advertise with Jason Bermas and connect with his massive audience on Patriot TV and his incredibly loyal social media followers. As an advertiser on Making Sense of the Madness, you also reach his followers on the top social media sites. As Jason dives into complex current events and conspiracies, offering investigative analysis and thought-provoking discussions to uncover the deeper truths behind the headlines. When you advertise with Jason on Making Sense of the Madness, you're aligning your brand with integrity, loyalty, and a dedication to truth. Jason's audience is passionate, conservative, and committed to the values your business stands for. When given the choice, Jason's followers will buy your products or services over other woke companies. Don't miss this opportunity to elevate your brand with the power of Patriot TV. Reach out to us today at advertise@patriot.tv.
And we are now joined by Brandon J. Weichert. Now, he is the author of A Disaster of Our Own Making, but we're also going to be talking about the potential of a cyber 9/11. Brandon, for those that don't know about your work, let us know and talk about this latest book.
Well, thank you for having me. Basically, I serve as an occasional subject matter expert for the Department of Defense, specifically the Air Force. I talk a lot about technology and how it influences national security. I also do a lot of consulting work with Silicon Valley and various academic groups as well. And so I have a lot of expertise in these areas. I'm also trained in geopolitics. I spent many years on the Hill working in these issue areas. And sort of this most recent book is a confluence of my professional work and my academic background, notably with Russia and Ukraine. And how it's going to impact this election, because we've basically been living through a proxy war between us and Russia that has played out since 2016 in our national elections.
So let's talk about that proxy war, because, you talk about the 2016 elections, but quite frankly, U.S. and global interests have been involved in Ukraine since, the late 90s. Soros was going there with Hillary Clinton. On top of that, in 2014, it's pretty much been acknowledged. There's been documentaries on it. The Central Intelligence Agency gets heavily involved, and you essentially have a coup. So you could argue that's a proxy conflict for our interests as well. But things really have heated up several years ago when, quote unquote, Russia invaded the Ukraine. Right? Obviously, there's a lot more to it than just that. NATO encompassing that region, constant threats back and forth, and really people getting behind Zelensky, who I like to call Little Rambo, who had, literally a PR campaign like I've never seen. They dressed the guy up like he was Rambo. He's 5'1", if that, folks. Let me just tell, that's how it works. So pretty much on par with actually Stallone. Again, he's not a tall man either. But we now are in this conflict where hopefully, if Donald Trump actually is able to not only win the election, but get sworn in, he has stated he's going to end this thing even before he enters office. I don't know if that's reality. I at least like the rhetoric. I see what's gone on in the last several years, and it's better than what we got, because if it doesn't happen, it is very clear we're on a continual path of escalation of the type of drone warfare we've never seen, and potentially on both ends, and has been openly discussed by Vladimir Putin and others within his administration, nuclear warfare.
Right.
So, go ahead.
You're absolutely right. And you basically, the book is basically this. And I actually go back farther than 2014. I go back to the end of the Cold War, when we made certain promises in 1991 to Gorbachev that we wouldn't expand NATO. And of course, we broke that within almost minutes of the unofficial agreement being made. 1994, that was another pivotal moment where Bill Clinton got involved in the dispute over whether Ukraine should keep its large Soviet-era nuclear weapons arsenal. And he forced the Ukrainians to disarm and then gave them this ridiculous guarantee that we would go to war for them if Russia ever came back. And of course, had the Ukrainians kept those Soviet-era nukes, it's probable the Russians would have never even wasted their time invading. But Clinton, disarmed them. And so we've really, and then in 2004, the George W. Bush administration hatched a quixotic coup attempt against the somewhat pro-Russian government in Kyiv, breaking all of these agreements that we made with Russia, that under no circumstance would we try to meddle in the internal affairs of Ukraine. We have initiated this conflict. And by the way, it's the same people who helped us get into Iraq and the disaster there, not just Victoria Nuland and her family, but there's a whole list of horrible people who I go through and I worked with at one point in the U.S. government, and they are inching us toward war. And I fear that they actually want war, that they actually think that this is the best way to collapse the Russian state, by using Ukraine as a proxy. I had one general tell me when I was talking to Air Force 2 years ago on the West Coast, this general yelled at me. He said, "Don't you understand we're breaking the Russian army in the field?" That is not accurate. We are not, actually. Actually, we're breaking ourselves in the field, and we're making ourselves more vulnerable at a time when we are already very vulnerable.
Let's talk about that a little further, too, because Russia has been a war machine, not for decades, but centuries. Like, that's something
1,000 years.
Yeah. People don't get it. They are very limited in their scope of history. When you say the meat grinder, they have no idea what you're talking about. Now, quite frankly, I'm an anti-war guy on both sides. I don't like seeing busfuls of Ukrainian kids 16 and 17-year-old kids, women as
And
well,
the women.
everybody.
Yeah.
And they're off to war. I got news for you. 90+% ain't making it back. Doesn't warm my heart. I want an end to this conflict. Like you just said, it seems like they want this to not only destabilize Russia, in my opinion, but also the United States. If you keep giving and giving and giving, and by the way, I guess we have this like plausible deniability talking point that we're not on the ground in Russia and Ukraine. That's ridiculous. Number one, during the war of terror, as I like to call it, we legitimized the use of what is known as private military groups, PMGs. They're everywhere. Right. What do they usually consist of? Former U.S. military former. Now, right out of the gates, you had certain levels of special forces on the ground there with the Ukrainian troops. It was sparsely reported in the press. And anybody that was paying attention, it was also the first time that U.S. credentialed journalists, because they've done such a great job, were not even allowed to be embedded on the ground of this conflict. All right.
And a lot of them didn't want to go. A lot of them wouldn't have gone anyway.
But the ones that wanted to, no dice.
Right.
No dice. Not happening. None of this has been reported in the media. But again, sparsely in the media, it has been reported that there is more and more of a U.S. ground force directing these things and the weapon systems we're sending. Sure sounds like it's not a proxy war to me.
Right. Well, I liken this to the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s that, of course, saw all the major players of World War II initially begin testing all of their techniques and weapons in the killing fields of the Spanish Civil War. You had the Soviet Union, the Italians, the Germans, British elements, American quote-unquote volunteers. And so, to me, Ukraine looks a lot like that. And we are, unless Trump can get into office, if it's a Kamala Harris regime, we will be marching headlong into World War III in Ukraine. We are teetering on the brink there. And one other thing, I know for a fact, and I've reported this for 2 years. Nobody listens. I've reported for 2 years. I know personally Special Forces former operators who are currently on the ground, and they most certainly are doing the bidding of the U.S. government and NATO. They may not be receiving direct orders, but their employers are definitely doing the work of their CIA paramilitaries. In fact, I live in Southwest Florida. One of the guys that lives down the road from me was killed in Ukraine not long ago. He was a former Navy SEAL, and I have it on good authority. He was actually a CIA contractor who was working directly for the agency. And so this is all, and I know a lot of these guys. I've done a lot of work. I was, I'm a civilian contractor for these guys. So I know a lot of them, and they're there. Australia has elements on the ground there, working under these sheep dipped, uniforms. And so,
you just said Australia, and obviously, we're talking about NATO, but you're also talking about Five Eyes at the end of the day as well. And that's and that's another thing that people just don't acknowledge. But even when you move away from Ukraine, Russia, one of the more dangerous aspects of this Israeli escalation, you dare question, you're pro-Hamas. No, I don't want World War III. They're a member of Five Eyes. We, again, had U.S. Special Forces on the ground there on October 7th. We sent more. They've been caught with Delta Force over there, and now we're announcing we're sending more troops there. We're heavily involved in Lebanon. We've seen an escalation, and maybe we'll get into this in the next segment, of the types of warfare that have now been normalized and didn't exist even 6 months ago. Of course, I'm talking about the pager attacks.
Yes.
Where, now, go. I mean, I'd love to get your take on that, because this is an alliance. Now, Russia has had to start talking about Iran, Lebanon, the Middle East, openly questioning that. These are the types of things that, when I look at the history of World War I specifically, are kind of like the sub-conflicts and wars that lead to global warfare.
Yeah, no, and the book behind me, The Shadow War, Iran's Quest for Supremacy, was another book I wrote 2 years ago. I predicted what's happening right now, almost to the T. But I will say that we need to be careful not to link what's going on in the Middle East with what's going on in Ukraine, because there's a lot more subtext there, probably too much to get into in this segment. But I will say I am not convinced, that Russia is totally behind Iran. There's a long history of Russia throwing Iran under the bus when it comes to dealing with Israel. They pay lip service to their friendship with Iran, and they'll sell them weapons and take weapons. But then, you look at the recent Israeli strike on Iran, they were able to knock out those Russian air defense systems. I'm wondering if they had actually inside help from Russia under the table. This would not be the first time. So, it's a little bit different. I try not to link, because that's what a lot of these neocons are doing. They're saying, well, we can't let Ukraine fall. We can't. There is a separation there in terms of what's going on. In the terms of Ukraine, NATO is in the wrong here, and we need to really de-escalate. In terms of the Middle East, all we need to do is the Abraham Accords. Finalize those. That was Trump's that was probably his greatest achievement as president from a diplomatic angle. Just tell the Sunnis and tell the Israelis, it's up to you guys to secure your neck of the woods, and keep us out of a direct fight. But there's definitely a subtext here that the Russians have actually been keeping Iran back. And so there's a whole nother story there that I've been writing about in the Washington Times. But it is definitely not as straightforward as the mainstream media would have you believe. And I don't know if Russia is the great villain in the Middle East.
One of the programs that I never hear talked about, and it's kind of funny because I was in contact with the author here, William M. Arkin, just before the Ukrainian conflict kicked off, and we were all set to do an interview, and then the Ukraine stuff kicked off, and he's like, well, once this de-escalates, we'll get back together. Newsflash, it never de-escalated. However, the importance of this article, which is rather extensive, and I'm just going to read the first paragraph, I don't think can be understated, especially when we're talking about digital warfare. The largest undercover force the world has ever known is the one created by the Pentagon. Over the past decade, some 60,000 people now belong to this secret army, many working under masked identities and in low profile, all part of a broad program called signature reduction. Now, later on, they tell you that's an art form. It's not the official name. The force, more than 10 times the size of the clandestine elements of the CIA, carries out domestic and foreign assignments, both in military uniform and under civilian cover, in real life and online. I would argue these are many of the Russian bots they talk about, sometimes hiding in private businesses and consultancies, some of them household name companies. And I would argue, obviously, tech companies and ones of influence. I mean, when you go through it, again, this is an extensive article, the type of technology we're looking for. One of the things that really opened my eyes was the fact right here, you think you're looking at a hand, you're actually looking at a DARPA-developed hand sleeve that can have anybody's biometric information on it, and by the way, emit human oils. Never had any kind, right? It's over a decade old, this program.
Yeah.
We've had no congressional or Senate oversight. It's not acknowledged. When we're talking about cyber warfare and something like this is out there, right? I mean, the plausible deniability of whoever you want to name as the enemy is off the charts. So what are your thoughts on that? And then in regards to the possibility of a quote-unquote cyber 9/11, we've seen lower-level cyber attacks going on over the past, I would say, 6 to 18 months, right?
Yep.
They're usually downplayed in the media unless they want the big scare, where it's going to be your infrastructure, your grid, white supremacists are behind it, or it's going to disrupt your election. So what are your thoughts?
Well, you're spot on there. So the first thing is I get into a lot of this biotechnology you're talking about in my book behind me, Biohacked. China is also hot and heavy in the development of this biotech, and it's actually very scary what China's doing because they tend to steal a lot of DARPA's designs and then they make it even more, nightmarish.
Is that possible?
Yeah, no, it is. No, it is. There's a company called Beijing Genomics Institute that everybody should be aware of. It is It is very scary. They're going after things like 23andMe or genetic data. They're going after the trisomy Y tests that European women do for pregnancy tests, and they're gaining access to basically maternal fetal DNA for God knows what. This is stuff that they pilfered from our people and then are working on their own now with the Chinese military. So there's a whole underworld of biotechnology, R&D, and genetic. The Chinese refer to these things as specific ethnic genetic attacks. So you're right. There's a whole underworld of really advanced, scary things going on with DARPA in the kind of biotech manipulating our biosignature. They're many years ahead. There's, somebody mentioned to me, why do you think all these Intel guys you see on TV usually tend to be bald? It's not just because of stress. It's because they're trying to prevent hair follicles from, but that's a conspiracy theory.
I'm sure that's a conspiracy theory.
But no, in terms of Cyber 9/11, and this is actually what I really wanted to talk about specifically in relation to the election. I have, for the last month, traveled to multiple U.S. military facilities, consulting with them on cyber defense issues and sort of technology issues more generally. 3 different locations in 3 different weeks. I had 3 different senior intelligence people come up to me, and they were very concerned, and they wanted to tell me, because they know that I can talk about it, they wanted to tell me about that which they were seeing in the cyber domain, and that is an unprecedented level of cyber penetration and hacking of our critical infrastructure, notably related to water and the electrical grid. And the consensus now is that it's time that they think there's a cyber 9/11, a massive national attack potentially set for on or around Election Day. And now the question is who, would do it. And so you have the usual threat actors: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, even Venezuela. They all have reason to do it. But I keep bringing up, and nobody likes when I say this, the CIA may have rogue element. I mean, we know there's a rogue intelligence community element that since 2015 has been working against Donald Trump and his people to try to prevent their election and then to undermine their presidency. We saw that with Russia collusion. We saw that with all the FISA warrants that were abused. Peter Strzok, Lisa Page. We saw that with the Ukraine impeachment hoax in 2019. We saw that with the 51 intelligence officers who signed that letter saying Hunter Biden laptop is a total Russian disinformation job. All of this was false, and I know you had Lee Smith on, and he probably went into it in greater detail. But the point is, there is an element of Obama-era deep state actors with a lot of clout and power who are manipulating events against Donald Trump and MAGA. My fear is that they are going to use, if it looks like Trump is going to win, and right now it looks like he's winning, if it looks like he's going to have an electoral college victory, this group might employ the Marble toolkit. And that was a toolkit developed by CIA that allows for our hackers to attack a target, but make it look like it's another country doing it.
And I'm sure we've never done that. I'm sure that's never, ever happened. I mean, Brandon, I think, number one, you're almost too kind when you talk about elements just that far back. I think we've had rogue elements in these agencies, absolutely, specifically the CIA, the NSA, and their subdivisions, because there are so many of them. Right. When we talk about cyber attacks, when we talk about infrastructure, this is probably the most frustrating thing to me. Why are they on the internet? Why in the world are we allowing anybody to remote in? Now, I don't think that solves the problem. I think that you should have a localized intranet for these things. But at the same time, you still run the Stuxnet problem. For those that don't know, if you get somebody internally on the inside to slide a little dicka-dicka-doo and a little USB stick with some code in there, that's malware. Over time, it can degrade. And by the way, just like you said, it could be masked into some other attacker, which I absolutely believe Stuxnet was. We got about a minute left in the segment. What would you like to leave the audience with, and how can they get the book?
I would say do not fear. Go out and vote still, regardless of whether there's a cyber 9/11. Do what you're going to do. Live your life. Prepare, though. Buy some extra food. Buy some extra water. If you have a generator, you're a step ahead. Power and water will come back on if there is a cyber 9/11. They will restore it eventually. Just survive that period where you don't have it. As for the book, get it on Amazon or anywhere books are sold. You can follow me on Twitter at WeTheBrandon.
All right. Thank you so much, my friend. Great segment. We're going to have you back on for a
I
full
love
hour
that.
and get into all the Johnny nonsense. Folks, you know the drill. Not about left or right. Always about right and wrong. Love you, and see you on the flip.